Picture the most famous portrait in English history. You already know the one. The wide stance, the fists planted on the hips, the shoulders built out like a gatehouse, the jewelled fingers, the small hard eyes daring the whole world to blink first. Henry VIII, by the grace of God, King of England, painted so large and so certain that 500 years later, people still stand in front of copies of it and feel vaguely told off. Now walk around behind the canvas, add a smell the painter left out, sweet and wrong, like meat forgotten in a warm room, drifting through cloth of gold and rose water and refusing to be covered. Add a chair with carrying poles, add a signature that the king's own hand has quietly stopped signing. Add a law that makes one sentence a true sentence, a sentence every man in the room knows to be true, worth your head if you say it out loud. Add a corridor of soft-footed men whose entire profession is to know all of this and to die without repeating it. That is the privy lodgings of Whitehall Palace in the 1540s. The biggest palace in Europe, 23 acres of courtyards and galleries and tennis plays and stairs, somewhere around 1,500 rooms, and every one of those rooms arranged like the rings of a fortress around a single truth that nobody in England was permitted to speak. The Colossus in the portrait could barely walk. We're going back there tonight, not as ambassadors, bowing in the presence chamber to a man carefully propped and lit for viewing. We're going in at the back with the servants. One person, one pair of hands, one winter after another. Everything they saw, smelled, heard, carried, and swore, on pain of everything they had, never to repeat. So, I make these history stories, and honestly I've stopped trying to work out whether you actually sleep to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who want to know what a king's leg smelled like through a shut oak door. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. One thing before the gate closes behind us. Tonight's story is about secrets, and a story about secrets has to be honest about what it actually knows. Everything in this story that carries a date, the jousting fall, the fevers, the chairs, the stamp, the warrant against the Queen, the trumpets at the end, comes out of documents, household accounts, the great inventory taken at the King's death, thousands of entries long, ambassadors' dispatches home to France and to the Emperor, acts of Parliament, and one famous, partisan, irreplaceable book written years later by a man named John Fox, who talked to people who'd been in the room. Where a thing is legend, I will call it legend. Where it rests on Fox alone, I will tell you it's Fox. I will always tell you which is which. But the eyes I'm about to lend you belong to no one in particular. The grooms and pages of the outer service came and went by the dozen, and history almost never wrote down their names. The young man you're about to become is stitched together out of all of them. Real duties, real rooms, real winters, borrowed face. Men exactly like him stood exactly where he will stand. That much is documented. The rest is the story. You're kneeling at a fire that is not yours, warming linen that is not yours, an hour before dawn, and your knees stopped aching a while ago and went numb instead, which is worse, because numb means slow, and slow means noticed. The fire is small and bad-tempered, sea coal and a little wood, and you're holding a rolled bandage of fine Holland linen out toward it at exactly the distance you were taught, close enough to take the chill off, far enough that it never ever scorches. You turn the roll in your hands, a quarter turn, another. The linen is finer than anything you have ever worn against your own skin, finer than anything your mother ever washed, and it is going to spend its short life wrapped around the ruined leg of the King of England, and before the morning is out it will be worth less than the rushes on the floor. The smell of the room comes at you in layers, the way it always does at this hour. Coal smoke, flat and gritty at the back of your throat. Cold stone and old rushes, that green damp church smell that lives in every corridor of this palace from October to April. Melted tallow from the stub of last night's candle. The sharp herb and grease smell of the salves waiting in their pots on the sideboard. Wax and turpentine and things the surgeons do not name for you. And underneath all of it, faint but absolutely constant, seeping from the shut door on the far side of the next chamber, the other smell, the sweet one, the wrong one, the one this entire palace is organised around pretending not to notice. You noticed it your first week and made the mistake of letting your face show it. An older man's hand closed on your shoulder like a gate shutting, and a voice said, very quietly, that a groom's nose is like a groom's tongue. The king doesn't pay for either. Welcome to Whitehall Palace, Westminster. It is a Tuesday in March, in the year 1546, the 37th year of the reign of King Henry VIII, and the surgeons are coming at 6 to dress the king's legs. Your name is Giles. You're 19 years old, and you came here 2 years ago in the summer of 1544 from a village outside Maidstone in Kent, carrying one change of shirt, a letter from a cousin of your father's who had served the cardinal, and the firm belief that you were about to see greatness up close. That summer the king was away in France, besieging Boulogne in person, in armour, at 53. The whole country talked of it. Bonfires when the town fell. You spent that autumn learning to carry wood along corridors you were forbidden to look up in, and you did not see the king at all for 5 months, and when you finally did see him carried past you in a chair, your first thought, before you strangled it, was that the man in the chair was not the man on the bonfire nights. Not the man in the portrait. You have learned a great deal since then. Most of what you have learned is the price of that thought. You serve in the outer rooms of the privy lodgings. Understand what that means, because everything tonight hangs on it. The palace is built like a set of boxes, one inside another. Outside is the court itself, the great hall, the public galleries, the 1,000-odd people who eat the king's bread and scheme for the king's eye. Inside that, the presence chamber, where the king appears under his canopy of estate, and ambassadors kneel on the carpet's edge. Inside that, the privy chamber, where only the sworn gentlemen of the privy chamber may enter, perhaps a score of men in all England. And inside that, the secret lodgings, the bedchamber, the little study they call the chair house, the bathroom with its sunken tub, the rooms where the king is not a portrait. You do not enter the secret lodgings. Let's be clear about your station before you get any ideas. You're of the outer service, the grooms and pages who wait in the outward rooms, who feed fires, carry linen, haul water, scour, fetch, and stand. You go as far as the last door and you hand things through it. The men inside, the gentlemen, the barber surgeons, the apothecaries, the groom of the stool himself, take what you bring and the door shuts, and what happens on the other side of it is none of yours, except that doors are thinner than dignities, except that linen has to be counted, and candle stubs collected, and basins carried out covered with a cloth, and the men who do the carrying have eyes and noses and memories whether anyone pays for them or not. You're not supposed to know anything. You know almost everything. That is the condition of your life, and the whole terrifying joke of it is that everyone above you knows you know, and the arrangement holds anyway, because it has to, because the alternative is unspeakable, literally unspeakable. There is a statute about it. We'll get there. The bandage roll is warm through. You test it against the inside of your wrist the way old Walter taught you, the way a wet nurse tests milk, and you lay it in the flat willow basket with the others. 6 rolls, warmed and turned and stacked seam down, and you cover them with a cloth against the corridor's cold. Fine linen for the wrapping, soft old washed linen for the packing. Lint scraped and carded in its own bag. The salve pots go in their wooden frames so they cannot tip. Down the corridor a door opens and you hear the palace beginning. Not bells first here, boots first. The night watch of the guard changing at the gates, halberd butts grounding on stone, somewhere far off toward the kitchens the first cart of the day rumbling in with its axle complaining. And then, only then, across the river and up and down the water, the bells of London and Westminster starting their long quarrel about what time it is. Dozens of towers, none of them quite agreeing. You have learned to tell them apart lying in the dark. The Abbey's great bell rolls. St. Margaret's is brighter. The city bells east down the river arrive late and blurred, like gossip. Your feet are bare on the stone because you move quieter that way in the last hour before the household officially wakes, and the cold has climbed to your ankle bones, and you own at this moment the following things: 2 shirts, a livery coat of russet that is the finest garment you have ever possessed and does not belong to you, a knife, a horn spoon, a comb, a lead token from a Maidstone church fair, and 4pence 3 farthings in a purse that never leaves the string around your neck. Your wages are 40 shillings a year, and your food and your bed. The candle you warm the linen by, a single candle of poor tallow, cost the king's chandlery about a halfpenny, and you will account for the stub of it, because in this household everything is counted, everything is entered, everything is somebody's charge. 2,000 people eat at this court, and the clerks of the green cloth know where every farthing loaf went. That is the machine you live inside. Now let me show you what the machine is for. You lift the basket and it has weight to it, the pots knocking softly in their frame, and you carry it out of the little chamber and along the gallery with your elbow brushing the wall the whole way, because a groom keeps to the wall as instinctively as water keeps to a channel. The middle of a corridor belongs to gentlemen. You learned that before you learned where the privies were, and as you walk, you count doors. First door, the woodyard stair. Second door, the silver scullery, where the plate is locked. Third door, always shut, always guarded, the back way into the privy kitchen. Fourth door, the one that matters, at the end, with a yeoman usher on a stool beside it who has known you for 2 years and still looks at your face, your basket, your hands, every single morning, as if you had arrived last night from nowhere. His name is not written in any book that survives. Neither is yours. That is the point of you both. The usher lifts the cloth, looks at the linen without touching it, and knocks. 2 soft knocks, and the last door of your world opens on candlelight and warmth and the smell you're paid not to have a nose for, and a hand takes the basket and the door closes and you stand back against the cold wall to wait. This is the whole of your kingdom, this wall, this door, what comes out of it, what goes into it, and what you will spend the rest of your life not saying about either. Old Walter puts it more simply. Walter has stood at doors like this one since the year the king was crowned. 1509, a lifetime of 37 years measured out in other men's thresholds, and Walter says, serve, and be silent. You're a pair of hands, boy. Hands have no eyes. Hands have no tongue. You're about to spend the next year discovering exactly how much a pair of hands can see. The wait at the wall has its own rules. You stand with your back straight and your eyes on the middle distance at nothing, because a groom caught studying a door is a groom with questions, and questions are the one cargo nobody in this corridor is allowed to carry. You listen instead. Listening can't be seen. Through the oak you hear the morning the way you'll hear it the rest of your life. A low voice giving instructions. The scrape of a stool leg. Water poured from a height into a basin. That long cold ribbon of sound. Then a silence with weight in it. The particular silence of several grown men concentrating. And then, you brace for it even now, 2 years in, the sound the King of England makes when the old dressing comes away from the open place on his leg. It is not a scream. Screaming is for men who are allowed to be afraid. It's worse than a scream. It's a long breath dragged in through the teeth, and held and then let out in pieces, and underneath it a voice you have heard shouting across a tilt yard in your first month here. A voice built to fill a hall of 1,000 people, reduced to counting. He counts. You've heard it maybe 30 times now, muffled to a murmur by 2 inches of oak, and you have never told anyone, and you never will. 1, 2, 3. The way a man counts when he has learned that the pain crests at 7, and he only has to live to 10. The surgeons come at 6, and they are the quietest men in the palace. They pad past you in the corridor with their leather cases and their aprons rolled under their arms, and the sergeant surgeon's men nod to the usher, and the usher knocks his 2 soft knocks, and they are swallowed by the door the same way your basket was. What they do inside, you assemble the way you assemble everything, from edges, from what goes in clean and comes out foul, from the words that slip through the crack of the door in the half-second it stands open. Fomentation, issue, the seat of it. Keep it open, keep it running, because this is the thing that made you stop sleeping properly your first winter when you finally understood it. The wound in the king's leg is not allowed to close. The physicians will not let it. When the hole seals over, the poison backs up into the body and the fevers come, so the learned men in their long gowns keep the king's leg open on purpose, drain it like a fen day after day, year after year. There is a hole in the King of England, and it is state policy to keep it there. And when I say the king's leg, I need you to understand what that means in this palace, in this decade. This isn't a bruise on a stout man. This is both legs, ulcerated, swollen tight against the garter, bandaged from knee to ankle under the finest hose in Europe. This is a man of 6'2" who once wore out 8 horses in a day's hunting, and the armour they made for him a few years back. The measurements are still in the armoury books, you've heard the yeomen there say it. Takes a waist of somewhere around 51 inches, give or take. The armourers don't gossip either, but numbers leak. Everything leaks except the door. Old Walter told you how it started the one evening he ever told you anything at length, over the candle box in the storeroom while you snap the good stubs from the spoiled. He was there, near there, in the way of your kind 3 walls away, in January of 1536, when the king went down at the Greenwich jousts in full armour, and the armoured horse came down with him, or on him. The ambassadors wrote home that the king lay 2 hours without speech, and men stood in that tilt-yard believing they had watched the rain end in the mud. That's the ambassadors' account, mind. Men paid to make a good story for their masters, and Walter only says it was the longest afternoon of his service. But this much is entered and dated. The king was in his 45th year, and he never jousted again. The legs were troubling him before the fall. After it, they ruled him. And 2 years later, the thing every man in the household still lowers his voice about. In the spring of 1538, the open place in the leg closed. Just as the physicians feared. The humours backed up, and the imperial ambassador wrote home that the king was speechless, black in the face, and in danger of his life for 10 or 12 days. 12 days, Giles. Walter held up his hands to the candle when he said it, as if warming them at the memory. 12 days when the whole palace walked on the sides of its feet, and no man dared ask the question that filled every room like floodwater. Because here is the wall around all of it. The wall you live inside, the wall this entire night story leans against. It is treason to compass or imagine the death of the king. That is the statute's own word, imagine. The lawyers have stretched that word until it covers the whole sky. To prophesy the king's death is treason. To say aloud that he is dying is, by any reading a careful man would bet his neck on treason, not rudeness, not indiscretion. The rope, and worse than the rope. So the physicians who know precisely what is coming may not name it. The council who plan around it every waking hour may not name it. The ambassadors write it in cipher and burn their drafts. And a groom of the outer rooms who has warmed the linen and smelled the wound and heard the counting through the oak. A groom knows better than anyone in England, and says less than anyone in England, because the statute was written precisely for tongues like his. There is one sentence you're given instead. You were taught it your first week, the way you were taught which stair creaks. If anyone asks, a stranger, a kitchen man, your own mother in a letter, the king is well. His Majesty is a little troubled with a humour in his leg, and is well. He has a rheum, a cold, and is well. The king is well. You will say that sentence in one form or another, perhaps 1,000 times before this story is over, and every single time both you and the person asking will know exactly what it is. It is not a lie, quite. It is a door. You hand it through the doorway of your teeth and you shut it, and what happens behind it is none of theirs. The dressing takes the better part of an hour. You know the stages by sound, the way a farmer knows weather by cloud, the dragged breath and the counting early, then the low professional murmur, the clink of the salve pots, your salve pots, the ones you carried warm, the ointments the household books pay for by the pound, wax and pitch and turpentine and pearl ground into grease, because even the medicine of a king must be richer than other men's. Then water again. Then, strangest of all, at the end, talk, ordinary talk, the king's voice, level again, asking something and men laughing, real laughter, quick and relieved, because he makes a joke when it's over. He always makes a joke when it's over. The first time you heard it, you stood at your wall with your eyes stinging, and you could not have said why. Then the door opens, and the morning's truth comes out to you in a covered basin, and it becomes yours. This is the part of your service nobody imagines when the village hears you work at the king's court. You carry the basin at arm's length but steady, no haste, no face. Down the back stair, past the third door and the second, to the little yard behind the wood yard where the fire is kept for exactly this, and the foul linen goes into the flames, and the basin is scoured with ash and river sand, until your knuckles are raw, twice, 3 times, and the water goes into the sink drain that runs, like everything in Westminster, eventually to the river. The smell of the burning is the worst of it, and you will not hear a description of it from me, because you already know it from the shut door, and there are things this story hands you covered, the way you were taught. It is enough to say that for the rest of your life, certain fires will make you go quiet, and you will never once explain why to the people asking. You'll just say the smoke turned, the clean linen is counted in, the foul is counted out. 6 rolls warmed, 6 are counted. In this household, the very bandages are entered in somebody's book, because linen is money and money is entered. And you have come to understand that the books are also the palace's memory, the only memory it is allowed to have. No clerk writes what the linen was for. The ledger says Holland cloth, so many ells, to the use of the king's majesty. The ledger is as discreet as you are. Everything is counted, nothing is said. 2,000 people around one secret, and the secret is written down 10 times a day by men who write it without writing it. By 7, the corridor smells of coal smoke and scoured ash, and, faintly, of rose water, because the perfumers come behind the surgeons the way rain comes behind wind. Sweet powders for the chamber, juice of herbs, vinegar of roses, cast on the coals till the rooms of the secret lodgings smell like a garden pretending very hard not to be a sick room. You carry the perfuming pan back down when they've done with it. The pan is silver gilt. What it fought all morning is still in the air of the passage, under the roses, the way a stone is under a stream. And here is the thing you had to learn, the thing that nearly finished you your first year, standing at that wall with your 19 years and your Kentish good sense. Every person in this palace ignores it, not fails to notice, ignores. Gentlemen come out of the privy chamber with their faces arranged. The council files in past you, velvet and chains, and not one nostril so much as narrows. The ambassadors kneel in the presence chamber 10 yards from a smell that would empty a tavern in Maidstone, and they write home about the king's magnificent aspect. It is the most perfectly mannered thing you have ever seen, and the most frightening, because it taught you what a court actually is. A court is several hundred people agreeing, every single day, in perfect silence, about what is not happening. Serve and be silent. Hands have no eyes, hands have no tongue. You eat your own breakfast standing in the passage by the woodyard, bread and a lump of cheese and small beer, and you eat it fast because the bell of the outer chamber has a way of ringing the moment a groom sits down. What the king himself eats, and what 30 years of the eating has done to him, that is a story of its own, a whole night of its own, and it is not tonight's road. Tonight we stay with the linen and the doors. By 8 the palace is fully awake and roaring, and the king is dressed, an operation of many hands you will never see, and the morning's great performance begins. The performance called the king is well, and you, Giles of Maidstone, 40 shillings a year, go back up the stair to fetch down the knight's candle stubs. Which brings us to the candles, because the candles were the second thing that taught you to count what you must not say. Every morning one of the outer grooms goes up with a flat box and collects the stubs from the sconces and standing sticks of the outward rooms, and receives, handed through the last door in a second box, the stubs from inside. Wax within, tallow without. That's the rule of the whole palace. Wax for the king and gentlefolk, tallow for the likes of you, and the chandlery issues both by weight and takes back the ends by weight, because a candle end is money and money is entered. You have carried that box for 2 years. You know, to the joint of your thumb, how much candle a night of ordinary sleep leaves behind. And you know what the box has been telling you since the autumn. The stubs from inside the secret lodgings come out shorter and shorter. Some mornings there are no stubs at all from the bedchamber sticks. just the drum of hard drippings pooled in the sockets, which means candles burn to nothing, which means candles burning at 2, at 3, at 4 of the clock. Some mornings the box is heavy with half-burned wax from the little study they call the chair house, and that means the king gave up on his bed altogether and had them move him to sit among his papers in the dark hours. The night watch hear what you don't. A bell rung within at 3, a voice the gentleman on the pallet stirring, a fire mended. Fetch him the plot of the fortifications at Boulogne. Fetch him the physician's cordial. Fetch him nothing. Leave me. The King of England cannot sleep. The leg will not let him, and the mind will not let him either. And you know this not because anyone said so. No one would dare say so. But because you weigh the proof of it in a wooden box every single morning and hand it to the chandlery clerk who enters it and says nothing in the book that says nothing. Think about that tonight, whoever you are, lying in the dark listening to this. Whole nations of historians would trade a finger for one page of the king's private thoughts in his last year. You had the candle box, insomnia, weighed out in wax morning after morning. You knew the king's nights the way a miller knows the river, by what comes downstream. There is a joke the night grooms make once quietly in the passage. Walter shuts it down with one look, but you heard it. The king holds a candle better than any man in England. Nobody laughs twice. In this household, even the jokes are counted. It's on a candle morning near the end of that march that you first help carry the trams. You've seen them for months, standing shrouded under dustcloths in a closet, off the privy gallery like two patient animals. Chairs. But not chairs like anything in your father's house. Great low-armed chairs of joined work, upholstered in tawny velvet, quilted, fringed with silk and gold, with gilt nails in rows, you know because you have dusted the nails, and run through their frames staves, carrying poles. The household books, when they come to be made, will call them exactly what they are, chairs called trams, for the King's Majesty to sit in, to be carried to and fro in his galleries and chambers. 2 of them, so one can always be where he is going before he gets there. Understand what these 2 pieces of furniture mean, standing in their closet in the biggest palace in Europe. The man in the portrait, the stance, the fists, the legs like oak posts planted, is carried. Along his own galleries, from his bed to his study, from his study to his chapel closet, borne on the shoulders of strong men through corridors built for his striding, past tapestries he bought to be walked past. On the good days he walks some of it, with a staff with a shoulder near him not quite touching, and the whole corridor pretends the staff is a fashion. On the bad days, the trams, and the palace has quietly rebuilt itself around the fact. Locks changed so doors can be opened ahead of him without a pause. A groom's whole errand some mornings is to run the route before the chair and open every door on it, so that the King of England never has to be seen waiting, in his chair, in front of a shut door, like luggage. You take a corner of the forward stave the first time because a chair groom's wrist is sprained, and someone snaps "Fetch the tall one from Kent," and for 40 feet of gallery you're close enough to the King of England to hear him breathe. You keep your eyes on the stave. That is the whole of your instruction hissed in the closet. Eyes on the wood, boy. The weight is unspeakable, and you will never speak of it. There are 4 of you, and the poles are seasoned oak, and by the end of 40 feet your forearms are burning and your fingers have gone white, and above you the king is talking. That's what undoes you. He is talking easily, wittily to the gentleman walking at his side about the new French ambassador's beard, and the gentleman is laughing, and the chair sways with the laughing, and you understand all at once that this is the hardest work the king does now, being carried as if he cannot feel it. Making the chair into a throne by refusing to notice it is a chair. You put him down. Down is worse than up. Down is where the pain lives. You learn to bend at the knee, slow and level as poured water. And a hand in a velvet sleeve steadies against your shoulder for one instant. No weight held back. All of it. An old man's whole trust dropped onto a stranger's shoulder blade, and then it is gone. And the voice above you is saying something dry about the tennis play, and you back out of the chamber with your eyes down, and in the passage your hands will not stop shaking. And Walter looks at them and looks at you and says, not unkindly, now you've held it up. Now you know what the rest of us know. It weighs the same as the kingdom. There is talk. You may as well hear it from me, because you'll hear it in every history hereafter. Of engines, devices at Windsor, they'll say, contrived to hoist the king up and down the stairs, him and his chair together by lines and pulleys, like a gun being mounted on a wall. Men whisper of it even now. The whisper is easy to believe from where you stand, with your forearms still aching. But you never saw it, and I will not pretend for you. What is written and certain is the trams themselves, in the inventory, tawny velvet, exactly as you dusted them. Where the record ends, this story tells you it ends. The stairs, the lines, the creaking blocks. Let them stay in the country of maybe, where courtiers' whispers live. The chair was real. Your hands know the chair. That spring you also acquire in the way of all households a shadow of your own. His name is Rafe. He is 16. He's from a dairy farm outside Ludlow, and he arrives the way you arrived. One change of shirt, a cousin's letter, and a face still soft with the belief that he is about to see greatness up close. He has given the bed next to yours in the groom's garret, where the wind comes through the shutter you've been stuffing with the same rag for 2 winters, and he has given to you, more or less, the way you were given to Walter. Show him the doors, they tell you. Show him the walls. Rafe smells the corridor his second morning. You watch it happen. Watch his nose go before his manners. Watch his face do exactly what yours did in the autumn of 1544, that flinch, that involuntary question. And you take his shoulder the way Walter took yours, gate shut, and you hear your own mouth say the words in Walter's exact cadence. A groom's nose is like a groom's tongue. The king doesn't pay for either. And Rafe swallows and files it, and looks at you the way you looked at Walter, as if you were born knowing. You're 20 years old, and you've become the older man in the story. It happened sometime in the night, without ceremony, like ice on a bucket. It gets easier, you tell him, that first week when he wakes gasping from a dream he won't describe. You don't tell him the whole of it. The whole of it is. It gets easier, and you will be ashamed, some ordinary Tuesday, of exactly how easy it has gotten. One more door you must know about, and then the year can turn. At the very heart of the secret lodgings, past even the bedchamber, there is an office held by one man, always a gentleman, always the king's nearest. The groom of the stool, who keeps the king's close stool and with it the most private body service in England, and, because closeness is power in this world and no one is closer, the king's private purse and much else besides. He is the greatest of the servants as you are the least, the innermost ring as you are the outermost, and his story, what that office sees, what it carries, what it becomes, is a whole other night by candlelight, already told or still to tell, and we will not poach it. Tonight you only pass his door, as you always pass it, quickly, with your eyes on the middle distance, at nothing. For now hold the shape of the spring of 1546 in your two hands, the way you hold the candle box. A king who cannot walk his own galleries, carried past his own portraits. A wound kept open by policy, dressed every morning behind 2 inches of oak. A law that makes the plainest fact in the palace unsayable. A box of wax stubs that says it anyway, every morning to anyone who can read weight. And now one more secret, the strangest of them all. Because this spring you find out how the kingdom is actually being signed. You find it out the way you find out everything, by carrying something. In April you're sent up with a chafing dish of coals to a small chamber off the privy gallery, a room you've never once been asked to warm, and told to set it down, feed it, and go. The room is the size of a good larder. There's a table with a green cloth. There are papers on the table in stacks squared off like masonry, and standing weights on the stacks, and a horn of ink and quills, and a ledger book bound in vellum, and a little locked coffer no bigger than a Bible. A man you know by sight but not by name sits at the table rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. William Clark. You'll learn the name later, the way you learn everything sideways. And as you kneel at the hearth coaxing the coals, the door opens behind you and a voice you do know says, "How many tonight?" The voice belongs to Sir Anthony Denny. You know Denny. Everyone in the privy lodgings knows Denny. The way a parish knows the steeple. Chief of the king's gentlemen in all but title. And soon enough in title too. The man whose face the king looks for when the pain is bad. The man who is trusted where trust has otherwise mostly died. And the man at the table says a number. You will not carry the exact number out of that room. Your ears did their duty and shut. And there is a sound you cannot place at first. A clunk, small and wooden and precise like a careful hammer. Then the whisper of a quill. Then the clunk again. You mend the fire slowly. A groom's slowness is a kind of literacy. You have learned to read a room in the time it takes to build one log against another. And what you read, in the corner of your downturned eye, is this. The man at the table takes a paper from the left-hand stack, lays it flat, and presses down upon its foot a small thing like a seal. Clunk. And where he presses, there appears, dry, blind, colourless, the ghost of writing. The shape of a name pressed into the fibre of the paper, the way a hoof presses turf. And then he takes up his pen, and with a patience that looks like prayer, inks the ghost, fills the dry furrows with wet black stroke by stroke, until sitting on the paper, plump and living, is the signature every subject of this realm would know at 40 paces. Henry R., the king's own hand, except that the king's own hand is 2 rooms away and has touched none of it. They call it the Dree stamp. It is not a rumour. It will sit in the record for as long as records last because, and this is the marvel of it, this is the most Tudor thing you will ever learn. They keep accounts of the forgery. Since the autumn of 1545 there have been 3 men with warrant to use it. Denny, his brother-in-law John Gates, and Clark, who does the inking. Every paper that takes the stamp is entered in a schedule, month by month, and the schedule is presented to the king, who signs, or stamps, his approval of the list of things stamped in his name. The stamp lives locked in its little coffer. The coffer lives locked away with Denny's keys. The whole engine of it is fenced with oaths. Grants, warrants, letters to princes, pardons, commissions. The paper kingdom of England, flowing across that green cloth at candle time, signed by a block of wood and a tired man's pen. And when I say the king has stopped signing, I need you to understand what that means in a realm where the king's hand is the realm. This is not a man delegating his letters. Every court in Europe runs on the fiction that the royal hand is sacred, that the name at the foot of the parchment was formed by the fingers of the anointed. Men have died for counterfeiting what is made in that little room every night by warrant. Why? Ask his hands. You have seen his hands, that once on your shoulder, the rings sunk to the knuckle. Ask the leg, which makes sitting to a desk its own siege. Ask the candle box. A man who cannot sleep, cannot walk, and cannot bear his own weight upon a stool through 100 documents has a choice. Let the kingdom silt up, or let trusted men be his fingers. He chose the fingers, and so the truth you now carry down the stair with your empty chafing dish is this. England is governed by proxy hands. The stamp is the trams made out of boxwood. The kingdom itself is being carried along the gallery, smoothly by strong and careful men, while the voice above keeps talking as if it cannot feel the poles. You tell no one. Of course you tell no one. But you notice, after that night, what you cannot stop noticing. How much of the palace is now this? The king is well, said by men who dressed the wound an hour before. The king walks, behind doors, in a chair. The king signs, clunk, and the whisper of clerk's quill. The performance has swallowed the palace whole, and everyone in the innermost rooms is holding up a corner of it, like your corner of the stave, forearms burning, faces smooth. Walter finds you at the scouring trough that week, up to your wrists in sand as grey water, going at a basin that was clean twice ago. He watches for a while. Then he crouches, old knees cracking like green wood, and helps you rack it and says the longest thing he will ever say to you. I came here the year he was crowned, Walter says. 1509, 18 he was. I saw him wrestle. I saw him throw a man his own size over his hip like a sheaf. I saw him dance. Leaping dances, boy, galliards. He'd leap, and the whole floor of gentlefolk would gasp. I saw him ride at the ring all afternoon and change horses because the horses tired. Whatever they tell you hereafter, you tell them this. It was true. The sun in that man was true. A pause, the trough water going still, and then, what you're serving now, that's true as well. Both things are true at once. That's the whole trade, boy. That's the entire mystery of service. You hold both, and you say neither. He straightens up, hands you the rag. Don't let this place teach you that the ruin was all there was. That's a lie the smell tells. You've only ever known the winter of him. I knew the summer. And he goes, and leaves you with your hands in the cold water, 20 years old, suddenly and stupidly grieving for a June you never saw. That is the spring. Fires, linen, candle wax, the chair, the stamp, the sentence. The palace holds its shape the way a barrel holds, by pressure, every stave leaning on every other. And it might have gone on holding, month after identical month, if the summer of 1546 had been an ordinary summer. It is not an ordinary summer. It is the summer they come for the Queen. First, understand the weather of that June and July, because everything grows out of it. There is peace, new and expensive. The war with France ended that June with a treaty signed near Ardres, and the court wears the peace like a garment it can't quite afford. And there is fear, because peace turns a court's teeth inward. With no French to fight, the two great parties of the council go back to fighting each other over the only prize left. Who will stand nearest the throne when? The unsayable when. The old churchmen and their friends on one side, Bishop Gardiner's men, hunting heresy the way other men hunt deer. the new men on the other, the reformers, the Seymours, Denny's friends, and between them, reading her books of devotion with her ladies in her privy chamber, a queen, Catherine Parr the Sixth, the one who came to the marriage a grown widow with a scholar's Latin and more sense than the whole council boiled together, whose religion leans, quietly but not quietly enough, toward the new. In July they burn Anne Askew at Smithfield. You never see it. Smithfield is the city's business, out past the walls by the horse market, and your walls are Whitehalls. But the palace hears it the way a pond hears a stone. A gentlewoman, a preacher's kind of woman, taken up for denying the sacrament, racked in the Tower first. Racked, a woman, gently born, the thing is barely believable, and everyone believes it instantly. Racked, men whisper, because her questioners wanted names. And the names they wanted were the names of ladies who wait upon the Queen. She gave them nothing. On the 16th of July they carried her to the stake in a chair, because the rack had unstrung her legs, and she could not walk to her own burning. You hear that detail from a yeoman of the guard who was posted there, a man you know for level-headed, and you watch Rafe take it in, watch him age a season in a sentence. A chair, he says. They carried her in a chair, and neither of you says the other thing, that you both, in the same instant, thought of tawny velvet, because some thoughts are not for saying even to each other. That is the July the palace is living in. That is the air. And in that air the Queen makes her one mistake. She argues with the king. Not shrewishly. Nothing so foolish. She debates him. Scripture, doctrine, the new learning. Evening talk in the privy chamber. The Queen pressing a point past where flattery would have dropped it. The king's leg screaming under the bandages all the while. And after one such evening the king says to Gardiner, in the hearing of men who repeat it, a sentence with frost on it. A good hearing it is when women become such clerks. And Gardiner, who has waited all summer for 1 inch of daylight, steps into it. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is the famous one, and I owe you the truth about where it comes from. It is set down in detail by one man, John Fox, writing years afterward, in a reign that loved this story, from what he said were the accounts of those who knew. The state papers give the plot its skeleton, the heresy hunt, the danger, articles drawn against the Queen, but the scenes, the words, the bedside, those are Fox's. Every historian since has told it because it is too good to leave and too well anchored to dismiss, and no man can swear to its inches. So take it as the household took it, when it leaked out in whispers over the years after. This is what they say happened, in the very rooms you scrub. Fox's story then, flagged and lit. Articles are drawn against Queen Catherine Parr, matter enough in that summer to make a 6th queen end the way 2 others ended. The bill of articles is brought to the king, and the king signs it, or suffers it to be signed. With the stamp in the house, even that verb has gone soft at the edges, though a warrant against a queen would go under his own hand if anything would. The plan is made. Examine her ladies, seize her books, take the Queen by night to the Tower, and then the paper falls. That is the hinge the whole tale turns on, and I want you to feel how thin it is. One of the council, Wriothesley the Chancellor in most tellings, drops the bill of articles from his bosom in a gallery. A servant finds it. Some nameless, walking, sharp-eyed member of your own tribe, a pair of hands with no name in any book, picks up a paper from the rushes, reads enough to scald himself, and carries it not to the council, but to the Queen. Fox does not trouble to record who he was. Of course he doesn't. History never records your kind. That has been the bargain of this whole night. But mark it, you who have stood 2 years at walls with your eyes on the middle distance. When the axis of the rain tipped, what tipped it back, so the story says, was a servant, deciding in the space of a held breath which door to carry a thing through. The Queen reads her own death warrant in draft. She collapses, takes to her bed in such terror that her cries are heard through the lodgings. The King, told she is ill, has himself brought to her chamber. And what follows, in Fox's telling, is the finest performance of the whole reign, played by the one player in the palace as good as the King. She recovers. She comes to him the next evening, meek as new milk, and when he, testing, baiting, wanting to be won, raises doctrine again, she puts the argument down like a work basket. She is but a woman, she says, her sex is weak. God appointed her husband supreme head and her instructor. If she has seemed to dispute, it was only to beguile his pain with talk and to profit by his learning. If, she says, and the whole future of the evening balances on the syllable, and the King softens like wax brought near the fire, and is it even so, sweetheart? The words as Fox gives them, or near enough. And then perfect friends we are now again, as ever at any time heretofore, all is forgiven. He takes her in his arms, he kisses her. The warrant, the articles, the Tower barge, annihilated, unhappened, in one exchange by the fire, except that no one tells Wriothesley. So the next day, in the garden, the King carried out into the July sun with the Queen beside him, laughing, reconciled, comes the Lord Chancellor of England with 40 of the guard at his back, halberds in the heat haze, punctual to the abandoned plan, arrived to arrest a Queen who was unarrested the night before, and the King heaves himself up on his staff, hauls Wriothesley aside and flays him in front of the halberdiers. Knave, says the King, so Fox swears it, arrant knave, beast and fool, and sends the whole armed absurdity packing back down the gravel and returns to his chair and his wife, who, this is the detail that tells you she was the cleverest person in the palace, sweetly pleads the Chancellor's case to her husband, wondering aloud what the good man can possibly have meant, knowing to the last stitch exactly what he meant, having read it in draft. That is the story as the household kept it, and whatever inches of it belonged to Fox's art. This much stood in the open where even outer grooms could see. In the space of 3 summer days, the guard were marched into the privy garden, and marched out again empty-handed. Wriothesley came out of that garden the colour of whey. Gardener's summer hunt was over, and the Queen sat beside the King through August with her head becomingly bowed and firmly attached. You saw the halberds go in. You saw them come out. You drew the only conclusion your station permits, which is none allowed ever. But at night, in the garret, Rafe whispers across the gap between your beds, they'd have done it, wouldn't they? Like the others. And you lie looking at the rafter you have looked at for 2 years, and you give him the truest answer you own. Go to sleep, you say, which is not no, which he hears is not no. The shutter thumps in its frame twice softly, like something asking to be let in, and after a while his breathing evens and yours doesn't. Because here is what that Julie taught you, and it is the blackest lesson in this whole night story, so take it and then let it go. The difference between a queen honoured at the King's side and a queen in the Tower was 1 dropped paper and 1 perfect speech. The difference was hours. Nothing in this palace is solid. Not marriage, not doctrine, not the council's plans, not the King's own signed intent. It is all performance, revisable to the last breath, and the only people who never, ever get a revised part are the ones who carry the papers and pick them up off the rushes. Serve and be silent. You are beginning to understand the second word differently. Silence isn't emptiness. Silence is load-bearing. August, then. Because the palace has one more great performance in it before the winter, and this one is played to a foreign audience, and you see it from the best worst seat in the house. The peace with France must be celebrated, and celebrated so hard that nobody on either side of the Channel can doubt England's vigour, which is to say, the King's vigour, which is to say, the biggest lie yet attempted, staged over 8 days with tents. The French send their Lord Admiral Claude Danbolt up the Thames in state at the tail of August, a fleet of galleys to Greenwich, salutes hammering off the water, and the whole apparatus of the court is trundled out to Hampton Court to receive him, and you with it, because when the court moves, the household moves like an army breaking camp. 400 carts, the plate and the tapestries and the beds and the linen and the trams, shrouded in a wagon you personally see loaded and personally do not discuss. Hampton Court in that last week of August is the greatest theatre in Europe. Gold tents and banqueting houses run up in the gardens, whole temporary palaces of timber and canvas. The French admiral comes with 200 gentlemen, and the English court is commanded to its maximum splendour, chains doubled, velvet regardless of the heat. 10 years of war with France, and now 6 days of feasting the enemy. Masks and hunting and banquets 2 nights running in the new banqueting houses, wine running in conduits, the kitchens below in a smoke you can taste at 50 yards. And at the centre of it, propped, magnificent, is the performance called The King is Well, given before the most discerning audience on earth. You see him 3 times across those days, always at distance, always framed, in a doorway, under a canopy, at the head of a stair that he does not, while any Frenchman watches, attempt. Cloth of gold stiff enough to stand alone, the great collar, the staff, carried like an ornament, leaned on like a crutch, and every English courtier arranging himself, by instinct drilled deep as speech, to shorten the distances the king must cross. Chairs appear behind him the instant protocol allows sitting. The walking parts of the show are measured in yards and rehearsed like a masque. And it is at this feast that the future is put on display too. Prince Edward, 8 years old, solemn and word-perfect, sent out to meet the Admiral at the gates with a company of gentlemen, the heir performing welcome, the father performing health, and every ambassador in the gardens writing home at night what he thinks he's meant to have seen, and in cipher what he actually saw. What did they actually see? You know what the French secretaries murmured, because their servants and the English servants share ale and no language, and servants can say anything to each other across that gap with shrugs and eyebrows. The king is very stout. The king's leg is bad. The king grows old. Nothing a treaty hangs on. Everyone old enough to shave has watched a strong man age. What they cannot see, what is bought with your mornings and Walter's lifetime and the candle box and the burning yard, is how far in the tide has come. That is the victory of those 8 days, and nobody will ever hang a painting of it. 2,000 servants held a wall of ordinariness around a dying colossus so perfectly that the sharpest eyes in Europe went home with the wrong date in their heads. It is on the last of those Hampton Court evenings that Walter takes you up onto the leads. He has keys you have never asked about, a door in a turret stair, a smell of hot lead and pigeon dust. And then you're out on the roof of the great hall in the last of the light, higher than you have ever stood in your life, and Walter puts one hand flat on the parapet and says nothing at all for a long time, and you learn from his silence that you are allowed to look. So look. The Thames below, wide and pewter-coloured, dressed over all, the Admiral's barges riding at their moorings with lanterns coming alight one by one, like sparks walking on water. The gardens squared out beneath you, the gold tents holding the sunset a full minute after the ground has lost it. Smoke standing up straight from the kitchen chimneys, the chimneys themselves twisted like barley sugar, no two alike. You count 11 before Walter moves. Deer in the park beyond, grey shapes drifting under oaks that were old when the Conqueror came, and east, you know it though you cannot see it, the river bending away toward Westminster and the city, 10,000 chimneys, the bells you can tell apart in the dark, the whole roaring machine of London going about its evening not knowing, not permitted to know, what you know. From up here, Walter says at last, it looks like it will last forever, doesn't it? You say nothing. You have learned from the best. He was crowned the year I came, Walter says. Everything you can see from this roof he has ruled since before your father met your mother. There are men ploughing tonight in Kent who have never lived one day under another king. Not one day, boy. Think what that means in their bones. Most of them cannot imagine England without him. Literally cannot. The imagining was made treason, but it was impossible first. The law only fenced what was already a cliff. He turns his back to the view and looks at you, and the last light is on his face, and you see how old he actually is, which is a thing his hands and his walk have always hidden. It will not last forever, Walter says, quietly, on a roof, to one boy, with the whole shining lie spread out below. The nearest thing to the unsayable sentence you will ever hear a servant say, and even now, Mark, he has not said the words. It will not last forever, and when it ends, they will need us more than they have ever needed us, and they will thank us less. There will be a morning, soon, boy, look at me, soon, when everything in that palace down there will depend on men like you, carrying on exactly as if the world had not ended in the night. Can you do that? And you hear yourself say, yes. He studies you a moment longer. Then he nods once, the way the usher nods at your basket and looks back out at the river and says the thing you will carry longest of everything he ever gave you. We are the ones who hold the roof up, Giles, not the pillars they paint. Us, and nobody thanks the roof until it falls in, so it must never fall in. That's all. That's the whole psalm. Now down with you. The candles want counting. Autumn comes in wet that year. The court leaves Hampton Court in mid-September on the ordinary hunting progress, as if nothing at all were the matter. Oatlands, the small houses, short stages, closed litters, and the household learns to read the new season the way you read the candle box. The stages get shorter. The hunting becomes shooting from a standing. The game driven past a platform because the saddle is beyond him now, on all but the best days. And twice that autumn, hold this, because the chronicles will barely hold it. The machine stops entirely. The fevers come back. The leg flares, the fires light in his face, and for some days in September, and again as the weather turns toward winter, the king is very ill, ill enough that the physicians are shuttled in quietly, ill enough that the council's comings and goings snap tight as a drumhead, and the world is told nothing, or told catarrh, told a cold, told the king has taken some little grief of his leg and is well. The ambassadors bribe and guess and get shrugs. The court at large is kept off with ceremony. doors, everywhere doors. You're back at your wall, in the reek and the rose water, warming linen with your knees going numb, listening to a man count through his teeth 2 inches of oak away. Only now the counting sometimes loses its way, wanders past 10 into muttering, and the surgeons stay hours, and the perfumers come twice a day, and one grey October morning the covered basin is handed out to you by Denny himself. Denny with his sleeves turned back and his face like sea-worn wood, because whatever happened in there in the night was not for even the ordinary inner hands to carry. He looks at you for half a heartbeat as the weight passes between you. He knows your face. He has known it 2 years. You are part of the furniture of his mornings, and furniture is what he needs now more than anything alive. All well below is all he says, meaning the yards, the fires, the outer rooms, the world. All well, sir, you say, the 2 of you, holding the basin between you for 1 second, in the only conversation you will ever have, both saying well, both meaning the other thing, both knowing it. That is the whole palace in one pass of a covered dish. Then the door shuts, and you go down the back stair, and the fire in the little yard takes what you bring it, and the smoke turns, and you stand in it because the wind is wrong this morning, and you do not step aside. Penance or stubbornness, or just Kent in you. The smoke turns and you stand in it. Christmas that year tells everyone with eyes everything the statute forbids them to say. The court comes to Whitehall, and then, unheard of, the court is in effect sent away. The Queen and her ladies are dispatched to keep Christmas at Greenwich. The halls that should be roaring with 12 nights of misrule stand swept and dim. The King keeps to the secret lodgings with the council and the physicians, and Whitehall at Christmas is as quiet as Lent. No masks, no Lord of Misrule. The kitchens, built to feed a festival, sulk at half-fire. You spend the 12 days carrying coals and candles down corridors hung with holly nobody looks at, past a chapel where the singing sounds like what it is, which is men keeping their voices level. The Queen has not seen him in weeks, and will scarcely see him again. Hold that gently. It is one of the saddest documented facts of that winter, and the household knew it before the historians did, because the household sets the tables, and the tables were never set together again. And in the very last week of the year, behind the last door, the small wooden sound you know better than anyone in Kent could ever guess, makes its most consequential clunk. On the 30th of December, the King's will, the succession of England, Edward, then Mary, then Elizabeth, the Council of Regency, 16 names, the whole shape of the next reign, is finished and witnessed and signed. Signed with the dry stamp, inked over by a careful pen, entered in clerk's schedule for December like a grant of park keeping. Men will fight over that fact in books for 500 years. What it means, who held the stamp, whose names went in and out of the 16 at candle time, whether the hand that ruled from beyond the grave was ever at the last a hand at all. You know only what you know, that the kingdom's future went under a block of boxwood in a small warm room you once fed coals to, and that outside that room, in the passage, a groom from Ludlow and a groom from Maidstone stood at the wall, with their eyes on the middle distance holding up the roof. January of 1547 comes in iron cold. And now, listener, bank your fire and settle deep, because we have arrived at the nights this whole story was walking toward, the nights of the death watch, when the palace performed its masterpiece. The month opens with an axe, because this reign cannot do anything, even end, without one. The Howards have fallen. the old Duke of Norfolk and his brilliant reckless son, the Earl of Surrey, taken in December on charges spun from heraldry and ambition, the last great family within reach of the throne cut down in the last weeks of the life, and on the 19th of January Surrey goes to the block on Tower Hill, the poet. The palace hears it at second hand as you hear everything, and what strikes you is not grief. The Howards were nothing to a groom from Maidstone, but arithmetic. The king has not walked unaided since autumn. The king's will went under the stamp 3 weeks ago, and the king's government has just spent its January removing the one house that might contest the boy's regency. You're 20 years old, and you can do this arithmetic. So can every silent man in every passage of Whitehall. Nobody does it aloud. The statute stands at every elbow. Through the same weeks, behind the last door, the tide is coming in fast now. You know it the way you've always known everything. The candle box comes down heavier every morning. Whole nights burning now, wax without end, the chandlery issuing and issuing. The surgeons no longer come at 6, they never leave. The perfumers work in shifts. The trams stand unshrouded day and night, and then, in the 3rd week of January, stop being asked for at all, and that stillness is the loudest thing yet. A king who cannot even be carried. The council meets in rooms ever nearer the bedchamber, gowns hurrying past your wall at hours when gowns should be sleeping. Ambassadors' men haunt the public galleries offering coin for scraps. A fellow in a good grey cloak lays a shilling, a full day of a craftsman's wage, flat on the woodyard wall in front of Rafe, and asks only mildly how his Majesty does. "The king is well," says Rafe, 16 years old, leaving the shilling on the frost, and walks away with his empty box, and you, watching from the gate with your heart going like a drum, could weep for pride in him and say nothing, and the two of you carry your boxes down in a silence that is the finest thing either of you will ever build. By the last week of the month, the outer rooms are a held breath. Meals go in and come out little touched. You know, you carry one line only as promised, and there it is. The voice behind the oak on the mornings you're near it has stopped counting. It murmurs and rests and murmurs. Once, one morning only, the 26th or the 27th, you will never be sure after, you hear it laugh, low, at something Denny says, and the sound goes through you strangely, because it is the same laugh as ever, the joke at the end laugh, and you understand that he is still doing it, still finishing the dressing with a jest, still holding up his corner. The performance and the man have fused so long ago that courage and ceremony are one substance now, and it will burn to the socket like his candles. And here the story must change its footing one last time and tell you plainly what is document and what is not, because we have reached the hours that were written down. What happens behind that door on the evening of the 27th of January 1547 was set down afterward, by Fox again, from the reports of those who were in the room, and by the traditions of the men who served. And the state's own records fix the frame beyond argument. Take the scenes, then, as the record left them, with Fox's name pinned where it belongs. It falls to Denny. Of course it falls to Denny. Somebody must finally carry the one thing no one has been permitted to carry up all these stairs, the truth, and every other hand in England has refused the weight for a decade with the law's blessing. On the evening of the 27th, with the physicians' faces gone past disguising, Sir Anthony Denny bends near the bed and says it, that in man's judgment the king is not like to live, and that he should remember his sins, as becomes every good Christian man. This sentence that was treason for 10 years, spoken at last gently by the gentlest officer of the chamber into the face it concerns. No thunder falls. The king takes it, so the account runs quietly. He considers his sins, he says, and believes the mercy of Christ able to pardon him all his sins, though they were greater than they be. Asked whether he will have any learned man to speak with, he answers that if he should have any, it should be Dr. Cranmer. But I will first take a little sleep, and then, as I feel myself, I will advise upon the matter. A little sleep. The insomniac's last economy. Even now he will spend his remaining hours himself and not be hurried. The messenger goes for Cranmer near midnight, riding for Croydon through a night so cold the Thames stands frozen. The archbishop summoned across iron roads in the dark, hooves striking sparks of ice, while behind the last door the sleep stretches on, and the speech goes out of the king like tide off a sand. When Cranmer comes, it is now deep in the small hours of the 28th, the king cannot speak. The archbishop kneels at the bedside of the man who made him, calls into the failing ear that he should give some token with his eyes or with his hand that he trusted in the Lord, and, this is the last documented act of Henry VIII of England, the hand's last signature, and no stamp for this one. The king wrings Cranmer's hand with what strength there is, hard, and holds. And about 2 of the clock in the morning of Friday the 28th of January 1547, in his secret lodgings at Whitehall, at 55 years of age, in the 38th year of his reign, he dies. Where are you? You are where you have always been, in the passage on the night rota, with a scuttle of sea coal because fires must be fed in the outer rooms whatever happens in the inner ones, and you have long stopped asking why the household's clocks and your heart keep the same hours. You hear nothing so crude as a cry. What you hear sometime after 2 is the palace change key, doors opening and shutting in a pattern with no errand in it, gowns in the gallery, fast, then slow, then fast, a long, total stillness, and then the detail you will take to your grave, somewhere behind the walls, a woman's single sob, cut off sharp, as if a hand had closed on it. Then nothing. Then the ordinary night noises of the palace, resuming one by one deliberately like players taking up a scene. You stand in the passage with your scuttle. The cold from the flags climbs your legs, and you know absolutely the way you knew the candle box and the basin and the counting, and with the knowing comes, in the same breath, the other thing, Walter's rooftop question arriving at its hour. Can you carry on exactly as if the world had not ended in the night? Now watch what the palace does. Watch. Because no court in Europe ever played anything better, and your hands are in it to the wrist. The king is dead, and for 3 days nothing happens. Nothing is allowed to happen. The death is sealed inside the secret lodgings like everything else these 10 years. The council must secure the boy prince, secure the tower, secure the 16 names before the world can be told. Hertford is on the road to fetch Edward before the body is cold, and until all is fast the realm must believe what it has always been told. The king is well, so the household is not told, officially, and the household, which knows everything and has never once been told anything, does what it was built to do. The meals go up. Do you understand me? The meals go up. On the 28th, on the 29th, on the 30th, at the accustomed hours, the king's dinner is borne toward the privy lodgings in procession, as it has been borne every day of your service. The covered dishes, the ushers, the order, the ceremony, and the trumpets sound it as they have always sounded it. That is the fact the chroniclers kept, the one this whole night has been carrying you toward. Dinner announced with the sound of trumpets, carried in state to a dead king's rooms, 3 days running, so that the ordinary thunder of the household would go on telling London the accustomed lie. You hear them each noon, standing in the woodyard with your face to the middle distance, the trumpets, brave, brazen, ringing off the frozen river, music for a man 3 days beyond all music, and the dishes going in at the outer door and coming out again, and where they go behind that, not even you will ever know. The city hears trumpets and sets its clocks by them. The ambassadors hear trumpets and hedge their dispatches. The performance called The King is well plays on without its king, proving at the last what you have known since your first winter. It never needed him. It needed you. It was always, all of it, the servants. Parliament is sitting. On Monday, the 31st of January, the Lord Chancellor rises in the Lords. Wriothesley, the same Wriothesley of the garden and the halberds, and whatever else is in the man, what he does now is weep. He announces in tears that the king is dead, and the same day, at Westminster and in the city, the heralds cry it at last into the open air, with the only sentence in the language great enough to hold both halves. The king is dead. God save the king. Edward, the sixth of that name, 9 years old, proclaimed. The unsayable said. And in the saying, instantly transformed into the sayable, the official, the trumpeted. Treason on Thursday, liturgy by Monday. You are standing among the household in the court when it's cried at the palace gate, packed shoulder to shoulder with cooks and yeomen and scullery boys and Walter, and you watch 1,000 people who have all known for 3 days arrange their faces into the news, and you feel your own face doing it, and you think, this is the last service. We are mourners now by warrant. Even our grief has been carried in covered, and counted, and announced by trumpets. That night in the garret, Rafe cries quietly in the dark, the way boys cry when they don't know which thing they're crying for, and you let him, and say nothing, and stare at your rafter. You feel, say it honestly, since only the dark is listening. Grief, yes, real grief, that iron absence where a fixed thing stood, and under the grief, shamefully, lighter than the grief, something else, arriving in gusts like a thaw wind. It is over. The wall you have lived inside has fallen and you're still standing. Tomorrow the fires must be lit for other men. The performance is ended. Long live the performance. Both things are true at once. Walter taught you that. You hold both, and you say neither. Now let the pace of this story slow with the palace's pulse, because what comes after a king's death is not drama. It is housekeeping, the vastest, strangest housekeeping in the world, and it is done, every stitch of it, by hands like yours. February comes in still and grey, and Whitehall turns black, literally black. The wardrobe disgorges mourning cloth by the mile, and tailors sew day and night, and the household is measured and issued blacks according to degree. Fine cloth for gentlemen, coarser for grooms, everything entered, because even sorrow in this house is a line in a ledger. You're given a black coat that fits better than anything you have ever owned, and there is a bitter little joke in that which nobody makes. The galleries are hung with black. The chapel is hung with black. 1,200 candles are ordered for the hearses, wax beyond a village's lifetime of light, and you who weighed the king's sleeplessness in ounces now help carry his mourning in hundredweights. He lies at Whitehall in his chapel for the better part of 2 weeks, coffined in lead within wood, under a pall, with tapers burning and watches kept night and day, gentlemen kneeling in shifts, masses sung morning after morning, and the household filing through by degrees to kneel and be counted. You take your turn on a grey morning with the frost flowering on the chapel windows, and it is nothing like you braced for. The coffin is enormous. They will need a carriage built for it, and perfectly mute. The stench, the counting, the laugh at the end of the dressing, the whole tremendous struggling engine of him. Gone, sealed under lead and velvet, tidy at last. You kneel with the candle heat on your face, and what undoes you in the end is the smell. Beeswax and incense and cold stone and nothing else. 2 years you stood in that other smell and held your face. It is the clean air that finally makes your eyes run over, and you let them, because weeping is, at last, this month, permitted. It is even in the rubric. On the 14th of February the procession sets out for Windsor, and you see with your own eyes the greatest funeral England has given anyone. 4 miles of it they will write, the chariot with its effigy lying above the coffin, a figure of the king made to the life, crowned, robed, so real that men along the road cry out at the sight of it. The black-trapped horses, the banners, the mourners by hundreds, the whole road from Westminster westward lined with kneeling people. The household walks in its place, in its blacks, by degree. And there is your place, listener, fixed in the order of march like a star in a constellation, the grooms with the grooms, Rafe on your left, Walter 1 rank ahead, 4 miles of England's grief arranged by the same rules that govern the carrying of a dinner. You walk 14 miles that first day in new-issued shoes, and the cold comes up through the soles like well water, and the banners crack in the wind, and village bells hand the procession one to the next the whole way, near and far, far and near, a country of bells tolling a man out of the world. That night the coffin rests at Sion, the great house that was an abbey until this king unmade the abbeys, and here the story must keep its oldest promise and tell you what is legend. It is whispered afterward, and preached on, and improved with every telling, that in the night at Sion the lead-sealed coffin leaked, that plumbers were sent for in the dark, that a dog was seen to lick what fell, and that men remembered a friar years before who had prophesied from the pulpit that dogs would lick the blood of a king who put away his lawful wife as they lick the blood of Ahab. It is a tale with the sermon's fingerprints all over it, set down long after by men with scores to settle, and no plumber's bill survives to bless it. So we will do with it what you were trained to do with everything, carry it covered. Maybe a seam of lead, jolted 14 frozen miles, wept in the night. Maybe a preacher's story found the night it needed. You were asleep in a Sion outbuilding on borrowed straw, boots still on, and heard nothing but Rafe breathing and the wind in a strange roof. And that is the only testimony this story can honestly give you, and there are a kind of rest in honesty. Let the horror stay in its century. It cannot follow you past this sentence. On the 16th of February in St. George's Chapel at Windsor, they lower him into the vault in the choir, beside Jane Seymour, the third Queen, the one who gave him his son and died of the giving, the one wife he chose to lie with in death, 10 years waiting under the stone for him. 16 strong men of the guard let the coffin down on engines and bands. At the end, as at the beginning, strong men and lines and careful hands. The officers of the household break their staves of office over their heads and cast them into the vault, white wands clattering down onto the coffin in the torchlight. The household itself, broken and thrown in after him, which is the oldest and plainest sign language in the world. Our service is ended. trumpets sound in the choir. Garter King of Arms cries the style of the new king, and it is done. The stone goes over, and, history being fond of its small ironies, a plain marble slab is all that will ever mark him, this builder of 50 palaces. The great tomb he planned, part plundered from a fallen cardinal, will drift for generations, unfinished, and centuries hence its black sarcophagus will hold another hero entirely, an admiral in another crypt under another dome. Kings propose, housekeeping disposes, and then, because this is the strangest truth of that strange February, and nobody who has not lived inside a royal household will ever quite believe it, 4 days later, the same men in the same city do the whole thing again, backwards. On the 16th, they bury a king. On the 20th, they crown one. 4 days. Stand in the middle of that sentence for a moment and feel it swing. You're marched back from Windsor with the household through frozen lanes, and you walk into a Whitehall already tearing the black down. The same tailors who sewed the mourning by candlelight are unpicking it, bale by bale, entering it back into the wardrobe books. Mourning is issued, remember, and what is issued is returned. And behind them come the hangings of estate, the cloth of gold, the arras with the stories woven in it, going up on the same hooks. You spend one entire day doing precisely this, carrying black cloth down a gallery and bright cloth up it, down with the night, up with the morning, load after load, your arms full of the change of the world, grief by the hundredweight, out, glory by the hundredweight, in, both entered. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, passing the other porters on the stair, everyone too burdened to bow, it comes to you that this is the most honest ceremony you will ever take part in, and that no herald will ever record it. The 4 days in February when the servants of England physically carried one reign out of the palace and carried the next one in. On the 19th, the eve, the young king rides in procession from the Tower through the city to Westminster, as his father did before him, as the custom is, so that London can see its new lord. You are given leave. Half the household is given leave. The palace can spare its outer hands for an afternoon of this, and you stand with Rafe in the crush at Charing Cross in a cold, bright wind, packed among citizens in their best, the conduits running wine somewhere down the route, the fronts of the houses hung with tapestry and streamers, and you wait an hour and a half for a boy. And when I say the city turned out, I need you to understand what that means in that February for those people. Most of them, like the ploughmen in Kent, had never drawn breath under any king but the old one. The Colossus was the weather of their whole lives, and now the weather comes past them 9 years old, in white and cloth of silver, small and straight-backed on a horse led at a foot-pace, gentlemen thick around him like a hedge, and London roars for him, roars, bells and guns and trumpets, a sound you feel in your breastbone, in your teeth. Rafe is shouting himself hoarse beside you. You are shouting too. You notice yourself doing it from a little way off, the way you have learned to notice everything, and you understand what the roar is made of. It is not made of knowing him. Nobody down here knows him. It is made of relief. The unbearable, unsayable held breath of that whole January, let out at last in one lawful thunder, at a child. The realm did not fall in. The roof held. God save the king, and every voice crying it is also crying we are still here, and you would have to have stood 3 years at a certain wall to hear that second cry inside the first, and you hear it, and your eyes sting in the wind. At Paul's, so the whole crowd repeats before the procession is even past, there is a marvel. a rope stretched taut from the very battlements of the steeple down over the churchyard, anchored by the Dean's Gate, and a man, a foreigner, a Spaniard they say, whatever he is mad, comes down it. Head first, arms spread like a swallow stooping, the whole city's heart in its throat down that impossible slant from the top of the tallest thing in England to the ground, where he kisses the young king's foot or near it, and then goes back up to tumble and dance on the cable against the sky. You don't see it. Charing Cross is too far down the route. But you hear it arrive along the crowd like wind over barley, a travelling gasp, 10,000 heads turning eastward too late. That night in the garret, Rafe tries 3 times to describe a thing neither of you saw, and you let him, because that too is how history mostly works, and at least this once it is a wonder and not a wound, being passed from mouth to mouth, growing as it goes. The crowning itself on the 20th happens 200 yards from your wood yard and might as well be in France. Westminster Abbey swallows the great of the realm at 9 and gives them back in the afternoon. What a groom gets of a coronation is the outside of it. The guns from the river answering each other down the tiers of the wind. The Abbey's own bell going like a heart above everything. And then, in the middle of the day, 3 separate times, a sound coming through the Abbey walls and across the yards that you've never heard before and will never hear again. The whole congregation of England shouting assent in one voice, muffled by stone like the sea in a cliff. They have shortened the service for his tender age, men say. 7 hours instead of the old 12, mercy of a kind. And Cranmer, they will tell it afterward, spoke to the child of the good King Josiah, who came to the throne of Judah at 8 years old and put away the idols of his fathers, and whether the words came down to us exactly as they left his mouth, that is the sermon's drift as the tradition keeps it, and men leaning on spades in Kent will argue about idols and altars for 30 years because of it. But that is the next reign's story, and the next reign's trouble, and tonight it stays outside the Abbey door where you stayed. What you get of the coronation, what is yours, documented in the only ledger that matters, which is your 2 hands, is the banquet. Westminster Hall that evening, the largest room in England, the great hammer beam roof lost in torch smoke and shadow overhead, angels carved on the beam ends looking down through 100 years of soot at the tables of the entire peerage, and you among the pressed men, the borrowed hands, hauling wood for the fire baskets and water for the ewery, invisible in the roar, keeping to the walls, keeping to the walls, keeping to the walls. You see him then, your one clear sight of the new age, a boy at the high table under a canopy too big for him, a crown that has to be the small one. They made a light one for the day, the true crowns being built for grown necks, glittering above a face white with the hours, and the peers of England rising to him wave on wave. And then the doors at the far end open, and to a shock of trumpets a knight in full armour rides into the hall, rides indoors, hooves cracking on the stone like slow gunfire, torchlight sliding down him in sheets. The king's champion by old custom, come to fling down his gauntlet and cry that if any man denies the king's right, here stands his death. Nobody, it will not amaze you to learn, takes up the glove. The champion drinks the king's health from a gold cup, keeps the cup. That is his ancient fee, backs his horse the length of the hall, and is gone. And you, flat to your wall with an empty water can in each hand, watch the trumpet settle, and the boy's small crowned head turn to follow the horse out. 9 years old, master of all of it, and you find you are thinking, you cannot help it, you were trained to it, It is your whole craft of candle stubs, of what the box will weigh mornings 10 years from now, of who will stand at his walls and warm his linen and carry his covered things, and say of him, level-faced, decade after decade, whatever sentence his reign requires. They are in this hall already, those servants, some of them younger than Rafe, faces you will never pick out of the crowd. The office never dies. You look up once at the angels in the smoke, wooden faces that watched Richard's feast and Henry's, and now Edward's, and you put your shoulder off the wall, and you go for more water. That is your coronation. It was, you will decide much later, by a Kentish fire, the best seat in the hall. You walk back the next morning into a Whitehall that has already begun to be counted, because this is what happens when a king dies, and nobody ever tells it, and it is the most honest monument he got. An inventory. Commissioners are appointed, and for many months the clerks move through every palace, every wardrobe, every closet and cellar of the dead king's world, writing down everything. Everything. The greatest inventory England has ever seen. Many thousands of entries before they are done. The tapestries by the acre, the plate by the ton, the jewels, the ships, the guns, and also, because the clerk's instructions make no exceptions, the other things, the walking staves, the pairs of spectacles, the little steel mirrors, the chairs called trams covered in tawny velvet too. Somewhere in those thousands of lines between the gold and the artillery, the clerks wrote down, without meaning to, the whole secret you kept. The staves a man leaned on, the glasses a man squinted through, the chairs a man was carried in, the plain daily apparatus of ruin, entered at valuation in a book made for accountants. Nobody who ordered that inventory thought of it as a confession, but you stand holding a candle for a clerk one long March afternoon, while he counts the trams with his lips moving, item 2 chairs, and you think, there it is. After all the doors and all the oaths, written down at last by weight and worth, in the one kind of book this palace ever trusted. Everything is counted, nothing is said. It was true all the way to the end, and past it, and the household itself is counted last. The great machine is taken apart gently, month by month. A boy king needs a smaller different service, and the new men bring their own men as new men do. Pensions here, places there, wages paid up and entered. Walter is let go with a small pension that is, for once, honestly earned, and on his last morning he does not make a speech. He walks the length of the Privy Gallery once, slowly, with his hat in his hands, past the door, past the wall, past your whole shared map of thresholds, and at the end of it he puts on his hat and says to you, keep the wall, boy, as long as they'll let you. And then, because he has after all been holding one more thing all these years, he was kind to me once, in 1512, when I was nobody, held the stirrup leather himself while I mended it, and talked to me about Kent. 35 years I've had that. A man can serve a whole life on one morning's kindness, and he goes down the water stair to the common steps, an old man in a good black coat, and the river takes him home, and you never see him again. And you find you cannot light the storeroom candle that evening for a while, because your hands... You stay on through that spring and into the summer of the new reign, one of the kept-on men, lighting fires for a 9-year-old king who runs. Down the galleries his father was carried along, his tutors hurrying after, and the sound of those small pelting footsteps over those particular floors is so strange and so piercing that grown yeomen find reasons to be elsewhere when it passes. The palace smells of paint and new rushes. The trams went to the inventory. The dressing basket is a linen basket again. Some mornings you catch yourself at 6 o'clock listening for surgeons who no longer come. The way the body listens for a bell that has stopped. And Rafe, taller now, steadier, somebody's older man himself already, catches you at it once and has the grace to say nothing. You trained him. The silence holds. And the fates run on past you as fates do, and you hear them all at your walls, year by year, and this story owes you the true ones before it lets you sleep. The documented ends of the real men who passed you in that corridor. Catherine Parr, the survivor, the cleverest person in the palace, marries within months the man she had loved before the king ever looked at her, Thomas Seymour, the new king's dashing uncle, and dies in childbed at Sudeley in September of 1548, not 2 years after the garden and the halberds. Her husband follows her within the year to the block, ruined by his own scheming. Wriothesley, the Weeper of the Lords, is eased from power and dead by 1550. Denny, steady Denny, the hand on the basin, the man who said the unsayable at last, outlives his master by little more than 2 years, dead in 1549. Old Norfolk, spared by nothing but timing, the king died the very night before the axe was to have him, sits in the tower the whole of the boy's reign, and comes out at last an old man to die in his bed. Cranmer, whose hand was wrung at 2 in the morning, keeps that morning to himself for another reign, and burns at Oxford in 1556, holding his own right hand in the flame. Clerk's schedules go into the files, where the historians will find them and argue forever. The stamp itself vanishes from the story, a block of wood, gone to whatever drawer or fire takes such things when their one terrible use is over. And the grooms, the pages, the ushers, the men at the walls, the ones who knew it all first and said it last. History closes over them like water, exactly as it was always going to. No memoir, no name in the accounts beyond a wage line, whoever they severally were. The man who tested linen against his wrist, the boy who left a shilling on a frozen wall, the one who picked a queen's death warrant out of the rushes and chose a door. They went back into England, to Kent and Shropshire and everywhere, and became men who were quiet by the fire sometimes, men who went still at certain smells, men who, 60 years on, in another century under a Scottish king, might pause at a grandchild's question. What was he like, the old king, the great one? You were there. And look into the hearth a long moment, the fire ticking, the question hanging, and answer, at last. He was well. Whatever else they carried it whole, and it is carried now, and the carrying is done. The silence was kept for life. That is the last documented fact of this story, provable by its own perfect shape. Nothing leaked. No groom sold the nights. No usher wrote the smell. Everything you have heard tonight came down through ledgers and lawyers, ambassadors and archbishops, inventory clerks and one old martyrologist, through everyone in the end except them. The best informed men in England left history nothing at all, on purpose, forever. It was the only thing they owned outright, their silence, and they kept it the way you keep the one good coat, brushed, whole, and buried with them. Serve and be silent. Hands have no eyes, hands have no tongue, and so, and only so, does a roof stay up. Stay with Giles a little longer now, as the story lets its breath out. The seasons go over the palace the way seasons go over a field that has been fought on. Grass first, then habit, then forgetting. The summer of the new reign smells of cut rushes and riverweed and small beer, and the bells across the water go on quarrelling about the hour exactly as before, the abbey rolling, St. Margaret's bright, the city bells arriving late and blurred like gossip. And it turns out that this, of everything, is what steadies you. That the bells never once change their minds about anything. Kings are proclaimed and buried, statutes are made and repealed, and the bells just tell the hour to anyone lying awake, patient as water, and some nights that year you lie in the garret and let them count for you, near and far, far and near, the way another voice once counted behind oak, and you find that if you follow them far enough down, the counting turns into sleep. And that first year of the boy's reign brings one more strangeness, quieter than a coronation, and stranger than one. And it happens not in the abbey but in your chest. The new government, as new governments do, sweeps away a clutter of the old reign's laws, and among them, repealed by the young king's first parliament before the year is out, goes the treason of words, the statute you lived inside, the wall around the wall, and nothing marks the day. No bell, no proclamation read at the gate. Laws die more quietly than kings. You learn of it the way you learned everything, sideways from a clerk's man grumbling about the reprinting of things, and you stand in the woodyard afterward with a strange lightness behind your ribs, like a draught through a door that was always sealed. And then, some weeks on, in an alehouse by the Lambeth horse ferry, you hear a carter say it. Just say it. The old king, he says, wiping his mouth, died of his leg, and small wonder, a man of that bigness. My cousin's wife's brother carted faggots to Windsor for the burning of the... and on, cheerful, half wrong in 4 details, entirely unafraid, and nothing happens. No one at the next table stiffens. No one goes quiet and slips out to earn a shilling. The unsayable sentence sits there on the sawdust among the tankards, common as spilled beer, and the carter calls for another pot, and you sit with your drink halfway to your mouth, feeling the world tilt in some way you could not explain to anyone at that table if your life hung on it. Though that is just it. It no longer does. You could correct him. You could set down, plain as a ledger, what it smelled like at 6 in the morning behind 2 inches of oak. And the worst you would get now is disbelief. Every door you spent 3 years guarding stands propped open, and through it blows nothing at all. Just air, just talk. You don't correct him. You finish your ale, and you put a farthing down, and you walk out along the river in the evening light. And somewhere on that walk, this is the moment, if this story has to choose one, when Giles of Maidstone becomes the man who will die with it all still folded inside him. You understand that you're not going to say it, not now that you may, not ever, because the law was never really what held your tongue. You know that now. The law only fenced the cliff. What held your tongue was the thing Walter set in you at a scouring trough, that you were trusted with the man at his weakest, and trust has no repeal date. The Parliament of England can unmake the treason. It cannot unmake the door, because the door, by now, is you. Another winter, another spring. The work is ordinary now, and you let it be ordinary, and discover the secret hidden inside ordinary work, which is that it is a kindness. Fires want lighting. Linen wants counting. The shutter in the garret still wants its rag, and you still stuff it, out of loyalty now more than cold. Rafe stands at Walls with his own boy beside him, teaching him the middle distance, and you hear him say it one morning, gate-shut hand on a homesick shoulder, your cadence inside his cadence inside Walter's cadence. A groom's nose is like a groom's tongue, and you have to walk away quickly down the woodyard passage, because a man can be ambushed by continuity as surely as by grief. And at some point, give it a year, give it 3. The wage books that could tell us are dust, and this story promised never to invent a paper trail for you. The tall groom from Maidstone takes his last wages and his good black coat and goes down the water stair as Walter went, and the river takes him home too, Kent again. Hop gardens and orchards and the long ridge above the Medway, and a village that wants to know everything about the great world and the great king. You were there, you were inside, tell us, and gets, for the rest of one quiet lifetime, a smile, and the fire looked into, and he was well. Picture him old, since we're inventing nothing but what cannot be helped. An old man by a Kentish hearth in another century, under another crown, fingers gone knotted, working a small lead token on a worn string, a church fair token from Maidstone, bought for a farthing by a boy who still believed he was going to see greatness up close, carried against the breastbone through every corridor of everything, rubbed smooth as a river stone by 60 years of thumb. He was right, that boy, in the end. He did see greatness up close. It simply never once looked the way the portrait said. It looked like a man counting to 10 behind a door. It looked like an old usher checking a familiar basket every morning as if the world depended on it. Because it did. It looked like a 16-year-old leaving a shilling on a frozen wall. Greatness, seen from the servant's side, is mostly people holding things. Holding linen, holding poles, holding faces, holding tongues. And never letting go, and never being thanked, and holding anyway. That is what the servants knew. That was the whole secret under all the others. Not the wound, not the stamp, not the trumpets. Those were only facts, and facts were never the treasure. What they knew, and were never meant to reveal, and never did reveal, is that the realm was a thing carried. That under every painted colossus there are bearers, keeping the sway out of the throne. That the world ends in the night, some nights, and is carried on anyway in the morning smoothly, by people whose names nobody writes down. And that it is possible to do this, year after year, and remain kind, and grow old, and sleep. Let that be the lesson that tucks you in, listener. Not the horror, the holding. On quiet evenings, allow him this, one last picture before the centuries take everything. The old man sits by the window of a Kentish house as the lean goes dark and does what old servants do, which is inventory, not of goods. His whole estate would fit on a table. The token on its string, a good knife worn thin with wetting, a black coat kept for burials, 4p something in a jar, which makes him smile sometimes, for reasons no one in the house was alive to share. No, he inventories the way the palace taught him, by weight and feel, the entries no clerk ever took. His hands remember on their own. That is the strange mercy of it. Set anything warm in them, a loaf, a flat iron, a grandchild's fever cloth, and the wrist turns of itself to test the heat, a quarter turn, another, exact as a goldsmith's balance, and someone says how steady you are with that, and he says long practice, and that is the whole answer anyone gets, and it is true, and it is nothing, and it is everything. Certain smells still stop him in a doorway, not the terrible one. Time is kind and has mislaid it. But rose water, of all things, rose water on a warm day undoes him a little, and beeswax burning and cold stone in October. He hears bells the way other men hear kin. He can still, past 70, tell a near bell from a far one with his eyes shut, still feels his breathing slow to their counting, and when the little Kentish church rings a burial he stands in his garden with his hat off, long after his neighbours have gone in. listening the bell all the way down to its last stroke, seeing, who can say what he is seeing? Frost on a chapel window, banners going away down a road. He has outlived them all by then, the whole cast of his silence, the princes, the councillors, the queens, the reigns. Outlived the boy king, poor solemn Josiah, dead at 15, outlived his fierce half-sister. Grown old under the red-haired daughter who was a child of 13 the winter, the trumpets played to an empty room, and who rules now as if the sun rose by her leave, and the old man reads of her progresses and her portraits. The ropes of pearl, the painted radiance, no age, no weariness, majesty without a body. And he thinks, ah, yes, I know that painter, not the man, the method. He could tell her servants a thing or two, and would die before telling them, and both of those are the same fact. Does the silence weigh on him, listener? You want to know. You've wondered all night. Here is the truth as near as this story can honestly come to it. Less than you would think, and differently than you would think. A secret kept for duty is heavy at first, yes. You felt how heavy, at the wall, in the burning yard. But a secret kept long enough turns into something else. It stops being a stone you carry and becomes a place you keep. The last room of the palace, the one that never burned, the one whose only door is behind an old man's eyes. And he is not locked out of that one. He is the usher of it. He goes in whenever he pleases in the hour between the fire and sleep, and everything is there. Warm linen and candle boxes and a hand steadying itself an instant on his shoulder, and a voice, level again, making the joke at the end of the pane. And no statute rules that room now, and no clerk counts it, and it is his. The only thing he ever owned at court, and the only thing he kept. They were never meant to be revealed, the things the servants knew, so they were never spent either. Some men leave land. His kind leave a silence, entire, unbroken, paid into the dark like treasure. And if you want to know what such a legacy is worth, consider that you are living in it. 5 centuries on, the room is still shut, and the whole of tonight's story has been one long walk around its walls listening. That is how well they built those nobodies. That is how a nothing kept perfectly becomes the last fact standing. And at the very end of the evening, every evening the same small ritual, older than thought by now. The fire raked low and safe. A laundress's fire will take a palace one day, but not his. Not once in 50 years. Some habits are a kind of prayer. The door tried, the candle pinched, not blown pinched, wax being money. And the last thing his thumb finds in the dark is the lead token, smooth as water now, the fair day farthing of a boy who set out to see greatness. He does not think anything in particular as he holds it. That is what 50 years does. The holding is the thought. Then sleep, old and easy, the sleep of a man whose accounts are square. Because centuries will pass now. Close your eyes and let them. The palace you have walked all night will change beyond recognition, and then it will simply go. In 1698, a century and a half after our last candle, a fire will start in a laundress's room, of all rooms, in a servant's room, and the 23 acres will burn, the 1,500 rooms, the galleries, the woodyard, the last door, all of it, gone in a day and a night. And of the whole vast honeycomb almost nothing will stand thereafter but one banqueting hall built by Kings Giles never heard of, and a name. Whitehall, a street name, an address for governments. People will say Whitehall for 500 years and mean the machinery of state, the quiet corridors, the unnamed careful men, and they will have no idea how exactly right they are. Even the great wall painting will burn with the palace. The wide stance, the fists, the little hard eyes. It will survive only in copies, the swagger outliving the wall it stood on, which is, if you think about it, the most honest thing that could possibly have happened to it. The performance outlived the palace too. Hampton Court will stand. You can walk it this very year, whoever you are, wherever this finds you. Walk the gardens where the halberds came and went. Count the barley sugar chimneys against a sunset from the ground where Walter watched it from the leads. At Windsor, in St. George's, the plain slab is still in the choir floor, and visitors step over it by the thousand, hunting grander monuments, missing the greatest and least marked grave in England exactly as he would have hated. The inventory survives, the actual book, the thousands of entries, and scholars turn its pages under glass with cotton gloves, and there, where anyone can read them now, are the staves, the spectacles, the chairs called trams covered in tawny velvet too. This secret was declassified by furniture. The statute that guarded it died before its keepers did, as you heard, in an alehouse hush that never came. Laws end, ledgers keep. Silence outlast both, but people will still do every single thing you did tonight. That is why this story can put you to sleep instead of keeping you from it. Somewhere tonight, right now, in a hospital corridor lit like a winter gallery, someone is warming what must be warmed and carrying it in covered, with a level face, so that dignity can hold. Somewhere someone is sitting up with a person the world thinks is fine, keeping the accustomed noises going, answering the telephone brightly, holding up the roof. Somewhere a hand is testing warmth against the inside of a wrist, the oldest gauge there is, older than kings. People still keep other people's worst secrets out of plain love and call it just doing their job. People still learn, in one held breath, which door to carry a thing through. Some things do not change. The carrying does not change. The kindness of the carriers does not change. And you have carried enough for one night. Feel how heavy the day has gotten in your hands. You've been holding it since morning, the way Giles held the basket, careful, level, seam down. You can set it down now. There is no usher to check it. It is accounted. Everything is counted, remember. Everything is entered. So let tonight be entered too, done, ruled off. The ledger closed with that soft sound heavy books make, and nothing more owed on it till morning. The fire has burned down to that deep orange that doesn't flicker anymore, just breathes. The bells are far away now, and getting farther, near and far, far and near, and none of them are for you. The shutter is stuffed against the wind. The door is shut, and for once in this whole long story, you're on the warm side of it, and nobody's going to knock. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a bed and a blanket and a roof that will not fall in, because roofs like yours are held up by more hands than you will ever know about, and they do not let go. That's more than a groom of the outer rooms dared ask of any night in 1546. That's enough. It's enough. Tomorrow there will be fires to light in whatever form your fires take. Tomorrow there will be things to carry, and faces to keep level, and walls to stand at. Tomorrow the whole roaring machine starts up again at 6. But that's tomorrow, and tomorrow is on the far side of the last door, and the usher there won't pass it through till you've slept. Right now there is only this bed, this dark, this slowing breath. The same dark as the garret above the woodyard, the same dark as Kent with the hop garden sleeping, the same dark as all the centuries of sleepers stretching out behind you and ahead of you. Every one of them held up, every one of them carried, every one of them, at the end of the day, let off duty at last. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way the river took the old men home. Easy, downstream. No oars needed now. Let the palace fade, gallery by gallery, its candles going out in order, snuffed by careful fingers, counted into the box. Let the bells quiet. Let the trumpets rest. Let your thoughts go the way of the procession, slower and slower, banner by banner, mile by mile, until there are only bells in the next village, and then bells in the village after that, and then just the idea of bells, and then nothing that needs a name. You stood your watch. You kept the wall. Whatever you carried today, you carried it whole, and it is set down now, and the carrying is done. You've earned this rest. Take it, the way you'd take something warm from a friend's hands in a cold passage. Both hands, no words, and dream, if you dream at all, of something easy. A summer that somebody else remembers. A kindness in 1512. A boy on the road from Maidstone, whole life ahead of him, sun on the orchards, going up to see the king. Good night.